In the words of William F. Schultz, a former president of the Unitarian Universalist Association and later Amnesty International, USA, come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Come, let us worship together. We now kindle our chalice flame as an act of connection with our larger faith community.
Welcome to All Souls Church. Welcome to a community where our search for spirituality and our passion for justice meet and mingle, where our head and our heart are divided no more, where reverence for the earth and belief in the dignity of every person inform our ethics, where music is an expression of our joy, prayer a sign of our faith, and acts of justice a symbol of our hope. My name is Shari Gilbert, she, her, and I am today's worship associate. We extend a special greeting to those who are joining us for the first time and those who have continued to attend weekly. For those in the building, you can access the order of service by the QR code, although we do have a limited number of printed copies of the order of service for those who would prefer that. For those watching on Zoom, the order of service can be found in the chat. Our weekly email bulletin is the best way to find out the latest news. You can sign up through the link posted in the chat or visit our All Souls website. It is important to recognize the people who lived on the land where our church now stands. The closest village was Nacotchtank, from which the name Anacostia is derived. They were part of the Piscataway group of the First Nations peoples on this land. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples were here before us, are here with us now, and will continue to be with us as we look in the future. Let's pause in silence to reflect on whose land we each reside in our many locations around the US and on our planet Earth. This is now the time when we behold one another, both in person and virtually on Zoom. If you are in the sanctuary, we encourage you to get up, move around, greeting one another with an elbow bump or a bow or a gas ho. Or if you'd prefer to keep your distance, just put your arms across your chest. Let's take time now to greet and behold one another.
All right, come on up. Thank you, Jubilee Singers. So good to have you in the sanctuary again. Wow, wonderful. Greetings, all souls, near and far. I'm Reverend Kathleen Rollens. I have the pleasure of serving as your interim senior minister. It is so good to be here with you today. As is so often the case at All Souls, there are several important events and announcements I want to share with you briefly. The first one is that someone among us dropped their driver's license out, I think it was out in the front. I know you're all going to be looking for your driver's license now, but it can be retrieved at the front desk after the service. So just want to let you know about that. Also, after today's service, 2 to 3:30 p.m., the REEB Voting Rights Project and UU The Vote are hosting an opportunity to learn about meaningful voting rights actions that you can take to make a difference in 2022. You can find the Zoom link for this session in the chat and also on the calendar homepage of the church's website. So do consider attending that this afternoon. I also wanted to draw your attention to the board feedback sessions. There is an insert in your order of service. The board is requesting your feedback about the church goals. If you remember, the Imagining the Future process that we did last fall was the first step in that. Now we have language for those goals, but we are eager to hear your feedback. So Tuesday, March 15th, 7 p.m., you can meet with the board on Zoom, or next Sunday, March 20th, after the service in person. I also want to draw your attention to something that's in your order of service. I hope that many of you will be able to join me and the Boston sisters, Taquina and Michonne. We are going to have a conversation about the film Passing, which was reviewed and discussed in their podcast series called Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. If you haven't checked out this podcast, it's really fabulous. But that is going to be on Wednesday, March 16th, 7:30 to 9. Again, that information can be found on the homepage of the church's calendar and in the e-newsletter and in your order of service. And that is anticipation of the sermon on March 27th about identity. So hope to see many of you there. That's online. All right, so let's take a minute now. Just be present as we turn our minds and our hearts to the concerns of this congregation and to those concerns beyond the walls of this church. Today we say goodbye to member Juanita Gallion and her husband Freddie Williams. They are moving to Santa Fe at the end of this month. So we're wishing them well and lots of new adventures in New Mexico. We want to hold in our hearts Jose Luis Sanchez, who is in ongoing medical treatment for colon cancer and is staying with his friend Peter. And we send our love and our wishes for comfort and for rest. Gordon Kent had surgery again on Tuesday and remains in the hospital for burn treatments. Our healing prayers stay with Gordon and his family. We want to hold up Andy Hackett, whose father Cliff died at home last Sunday. He was almost 92, and he died surrounded by his 7 children as he wished. And we send our condolences to Andy and spouse Carol Collins and their child Sophia Hackett. We're offering our condolences as well to Greg Mees and his family on the death of Greg's father last weekend. Greg's father was just a few months shy of 100 years old, and Greg and his family were in Chicago for the funeral yesterday. We also hold Dolores Miller, our Director of Religious Education and Heart and Mind, whose cousin Julie died on Thursday of pancreatic cancer. And we have a celebration. We want to acknowledge that Laura Saylor fell last Sunday and dislocated her thumb, and Laura is with us today, not wanting to miss singing with the Jubilee Singers. So thumbs up to you, Laura. We are so glad you're here, and we are sending you our wishes for recovery and rest. Dear ones, let's now turn our hearts and minds inward to a place of clarity and silence and gratitude. Oh, thou Spirit of life and of love, known to us by many names and beyond all naming, be with us now in the gathered silence of this hour. We are united in song and in silence, in our presence and our prayers, as we consider all that is and is in our lives. This day we continue our prayers for the people of Ukraine whose lives are in peril, as we pray for the peace of all nations. This day we pray for all who are sick and suffering of illness of mind, body, heart, spirit. And we hold all those who love them and care for them and who are worried about them in our hearts and minds this day. We pray for the continued health and vitality of this congregation, so that the ministries which continue to inspire and challenge, soothe and sustain us may continue through our gifts of time and talent and treasure. May the holy hour, may this holy hour infuse and enthuse us with the spirit of life and of love itself. for all those joys and concerns, named and unnamed, we hold in our hearts this day. Our reading today comes from an article entitled, "What is the Mission of Missions?" by a professional church consultant and author named Dan Hotchkiss. In it, he's talking about why churches say they do social justice work and how he thinks that answer needs to shift. He writes this: "Why do they do it? In budgeting and planning for this work, most congregations say their mission is to help others. That's a good answer. For many congregations, though, a better answer is to say the purpose of social ministry is instead to change the lives of its members. The mission of a hospital is to heal the sick. I am suggesting that for many congregations, a better analogy would be a medical school whose mission is to train doctors and nurses. Medical schools and their associated teaching hospitals treat lots of patients. You can't train doctors without giving them a chance to practice. The purpose of the medical profession is to heal. The purpose of the school, though, is not to heal, but to create healers."
Hello, all souls, here and online. It is nice to be back here. My entire family got COVID via our daughter's school, and the sequencing of when we each tested positive meant that we had to be quarantined at home for 2 entire weeks. Thankfully, our cases were relatively mild, and everyone is fully recovered. And perhaps not surprisingly, it turns out that even a wide variety of scientifically proven safety protocols are still no match for the disease-spreading power of a preschool classroom. In the description for today's service, I set up some key questions about what we're trying to do in our social justice ministries. They start with a basic recognition, which is that All Souls and Unitarian Universalists and UU congregations generally have done a great deal over the years to promote justice locally, nationally, and even internationally. Our bottom line is clear. We want to have a positive impact. Social justice is one of the things our congregations are most known for in our communities, and it's consistently at or near the top of the list for why people get interested in joining. Beyond this desire to make an impact, however, there are many choices about how to focus our limited time, energy, and resources, and in particular, what we can do to ensure that our work is rewarding, effective, and perhaps most importantly of all, sustainable. So let me offer 3 perspectives on this conversation. The first is about our calling right now overall as a Unitarian Universalist religious community. It's no understatement to say that we are at an absolutely critical time in history. This is true for the world in general. I expect that we are all deeply concerned with what is happening in Ukraine, and today's offering is dedicated to the UU Service Committee's relief efforts there. But for my words today, I'm thinking especially about the United States. And as just a little personal and historical context, I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, just about 2.5 hours up the road. Shout out. I was raised in the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg, and my parents are still active members there. And as a kid, I took many trips to the Gettysburg battlefield. And there's a physical place there on what's known as Cemetery Ridge that is called the high water mark of the Confederacy. It marks the farthest northern point reached by Confederate forces during Pickett's charge on July 3rd, 1863. Although the current national struggle won't be marked with a physical location, I think it's fair to wonder where the high water mark of the current Confederacy, i.e. the latest incarnation of colonialism and white supremacy, will be. People committed to preserving racism, sexism, and Christian extremism at any cost, including the cost of our democracy itself, are fighting as hard as they can with considerable success. Personally, I would love to think that Trump's presidency was the high watermark, that it couldn't possibly get that worse again. But both my intellect and my gut caution me not to rest idly in that hope. With a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, the censorship of teaching actual facts and history related to racism, the obsession with making abortion illegal, and so much more, it is not a time for progressive, liberal, or even moderate values to rest. Too much hangs in the balance. Now, our religious ancestors set themselves apart by choosing to worship a God of love rather than a God of judgment, by affirming the value of all people, not the depravity of all people. Were they always on the side of justice? Of course not. But some of our forebears were passionate leaders in the fight against slavery, the struggle for women's suffrage and the civil rights movement, work for LGBT equality. And now we are called to both build on that positive legacy and to be honest and humble about the ways we have fallen short, and in particular, the ways we have failed to address racism within our own congregations and within ourselves. So quite simply, I believe that the challenge of our time, the calling of our time, is to build equitable multicultural congregations and an equitable multicultural society. We need to show up with the information we have now, both about what's wrong and how to work for solutions in ways that don't continue to replicate white supremacy culture, but rather create new collaborations and approaches that center and support leadership from the margins. So what does that look like? Here's a second perspective I want to offer. My sense, having worked at All Souls and supported work in many other congregations, is that in a given year, perhaps 20 to 30% in an average Unitarian Universalist congregation will participate in an official action of the social justice ministry. The number of people who are consistently active, meaning that there are regular and contributing members of an action group, is probably less than 10% of the congregation. This means that the vast majority of congregants, perhaps 70 to 90%, are only going to impact justice outside of the congregation. And so the congregation can have a much larger impact on justice overall if it can help develop the knowledge, skills, commitment, and courage of this group. And that brings me to my third Third observation, which you already heard in the reading. Dan Hotchkiss suggests that we view ourselves more like a medical school, where our purpose is not to heal, but to create healers. So where do we go with this? What are we even trying to do? I think Hotchkiss makes a good point, but it's not either or. I think it's both and. The church should ground and mobilize people for action in their individual spheres, and it should take action as an institution. For most Unitarian Universalist congregations, including All Souls, I think implementing the above conclusions requires or at least invites some shifts in approach. When we acknowledge that most of our folks are doing their justice work, to the extent that they're doing it at all, somewhere outside of the congregation, it begs that question, well, how are we preparing, inspiring, and supporting people to do that? If that hasn't been a clear goal previously, what does it look like to make it a clear goal? At All Souls, I'm getting more and more excited about the prospect of having a core curriculum for spiritually grounded counter-oppressive activism and leadership. Rather than one-off classes and trainings, we would offer many of the same trainings again and again and again, year after year, so that each new person who connects to our congregation, every new leader in every single group, has access to the same guidance. The more folks have a shared experience, frame of reference and language, the more progress we can make on both internal and external transformation. Now, speaking of transformation, I have some specific news to share about All Souls' internal work in this arena. For people new to Unitarian Universalism or All Souls, there are 7 principles agreed to by congregations as part of joining the Unitarian Universalist Association. A growing number of congregations are adopting another, which All Souls did in December 2017. In this 8th principle, All Souls and other congregations have committed to, quote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. In April 2018, our Board of Trustees established an ad hoc committee called the Transformation Team to advise and assist the board on potential staffing, accountability, and governance changes related to implementing the 8th principle. This group was intentionally designed to be time-limited, with dissolution happening by a decision of the board based on a recommendation from the team. In the last few months of 2021, leaders of the Transformation Team and board held a series of meetings and agreed that the time for dissolution had come. The board had adopted a large number of policy changes recommended by the team, and the church's transformation work was shifting more into the operational level, which is carried out by staff and laity, rather than the policy level, which is for the board and board committees. And additionally, those conversations identified that it would make sense for the 8th Principle Task Force to also dissolve. That group started in large part to advocate for the adoption of the 8th Principle, and they did an enormous amount of work with the Transformation Team. But the 8th Principle Task Force leaders agreed that it made sense to end as well and consolidate the work in a new single entity going forward. This new group will perform 3 types of work. Practical, meaning education, resourcing, and coaching to implement the 8th principle across the ministries and operations of the church. Advisory, which means helping the executive team, board, and other groups think through the transformation needs of the church. And finally, strategic, which means helping church groups and people identify what similar transformation activities are happening in order to create synergy and avoid redundancy. The tentative name is the 8th Principle Advisory Team, or simply the 8 Team. Dun, 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 dun. It's a very generational joke, but it was my generation. The exact size and composition is yet to be determined. Our early tasks will be highlighting and celebrating the incredible work of the transformation team and the 8th Principle Task Force and identifying the best ways to carry that work forward. If you are interested in serving, please email me. This news will also go out in an all-church email tomorrow. In this year of our bicentennial, I think it's fitting that we are launching a new ongoing group dedicated to implementation of the 8th principle. Taking this work to the next level requires new ways of doing things. Okay, so in addition to the internal work and the internal training to create healers, I still think it's imperative for us to take action as a congregation. There are many reasons for this, but here's my take on the most simple and important one. We have an imperative to act as an institution because, as an institution, we have the power to make a real difference. With our words, with our labor, with our money, with our building, sometimes with out-front leadership, and sometimes with behind-the-scenes solidarity. Unitarian Universalist congregations can absolutely be forces for justice and liberation in our communities. I want to lift up two ways that All Souls does this and invite everyone to join in a simple, impactful, upcoming action. The first is through our Beckner Advancement Fund. And to say more, I'm thrilled to introduce Ruth Goins. Ruth joined the All Souls staff in this capacity in December 2020 and works 10 hours a week to help administer both external and internal grants. Take it away, Ruth.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning. It's nice to be here with you. I know that those who are actually in the sanctuary really wanted to be at church this morning because it's mighty cold. And for those, I want to say hello to those who are joining us virtually, especially the Beckner committee members, because I don't think you expected to see me up here today. I appreciate the opportunity to say just a few words about the work of the Beckner Fund. When I try to describe my role when out in the world, recently I got a new doctor and they asked me, so now what is it that you do? And I explain the work, but then I say, I serve as a bridge for the Beckner Fund Committee with nonprofit social justice community groups in the district and vice versa. So I'm the way they talk to each other until such time every once in a while when they get a chance to talk to each other in real time. So before I even arrived, Beckner committee members had been talking about their desire to share their work more directly with this congregation. In my few moments, you can take it as the beginning of that process, because periodically we intend to pass the mic to some of the groups Beckner has supported so they can share with all of us what they're doing to advance social justice in the city. So first, a quick history. The Beckner Fund was not originally the Beckner Fund. Earl and Meta Beckner were active members at All Souls, but they wished to make their gift anonymously. It came in the form of real estate investments, originally intended as retirement protection because Earl Beckner was a diabetic and that status made him ineligible for a federal government pension. Yes, what? The anonymous gift was announced to the congregation in 1974. The first grant was awarded in 1975. But then in 1979, Mr. Beckner agreed to allow the church to acknowledge the source of the fund at the time of his wife's death. The church was charged to use the earnings on their gift to build a more collaborative, attractive, and forward-looking community that fosters human rights and dignity and enhances the influence of All Souls Church in the Washington metropolitan area. That language is pretty much just what it was 49 years ago. About 25 years ago, another active member, John Shively, bequeathed another gift to the church. And the determination was, we're going to have the one Beckner committee be responsible for the oversight and the grant-making process for both. And so the two of those gifts make up the Beckner Advancement Fund. So I have two more things to do while I'm standing here. And the first is to share with you the vision and values that guide the fund's work. Here's our vision: a city where all residents have the opportunities and resources they need to live with dignity and share in the district's prosperity and vibrancy. So clearly, there's lots of room in this city in 2022 for us to help. And the way Beckner does that is to provide flexible funds that will accelerate community-driven social change in the district. Now, if we're all on the same page, a slide should show up, and it did. Wonderful. These are the Beckner Fund's values. And all of us know what the first two of those mean, and we share those. But let me say a few words about how the others play out in the Beckner Committee's work. If you were to look at our web pages, which are all-souls.org, find the social justice drop-down, and then find the Beckner Advancement Fund, it's the second thing on that list, you would see that catalyzing initiatives often translates to an emphasis on newer organizations or fresh innovations from more established groups. The list of community groups I will share at the end of this is a good example of this. Many of them are new to Beckner this year and didn't exist at all 6 or 7 years ago. And finally, that value about hope. When I read Beckner's job description 18 months ago, this one really stood out for me because I don't believe I'd ever seen it spelled out before so explicitly. Yet, of course, a church-based philanthropic initiative would lead with hope, because in Rob's words, what do we think we're doing anyway? Isn't it acting out faith with hope that better is possible? Finally, here's a quick view of the grants the Beckner Committee, confirmed by the Board of Trustees, has awarded thus far in this church year. First, Beckner makes grants to internal social justice groups, you know that, with the same lens of our vision and values every year. So far this year, grants have gone to the REAP Project and to the Reproductive Justice Initiative. However, the committee is in the middle of its spring cycle of internal grant making, and we anticipate awarding additional grants this month. Literally, their meeting starts at 1 o'clock. And then here's the list of the external groups that have been awarded a total of $85,000 for 2022. It would take too long to describe all of them, and that's why we'll be coming back periodically to interweave their stories with the spirit-filled work that happens in this building. What I can say is that they represent trans rights, workers' self-determination, criminal justice reform and accountability, migrant and refugee support, and so much more. If anyone has questions and feels compelled to inquire about the responsibilities of committee membership or anything else that has come up during this time as I've been here speaking, you can find me at ascu.beckner.org. gmail.com, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Ruth was hired and worked for the first 8 to 10 months during that pandemic, and I was so excited to finally meet her in person and grateful that we were able to welcome her in person to worship today. And as part of our bicentennial observation, there will be a program about the Beckner Fund, history, present, and sort of the future of values-based philanthropy. That'll be Monday, May 23rd. More info will be coming. Now, in addition to this incredible grant-making work, it's critical that the church show up and take action. And the reality is that the most impact happens when church staff and lay people are working closely together. And within the social justice ministry now, there is widespread agreement that we should do less things and do them more collaboratively so that the work is more effective and more sustainable. One such thing is happening now through All Souls membership in the Washington Interfaith Network, WIN. Washington, D.C. will hold elections for mayor, attorney general, council chair, and several council seats this year. Elections like this present the greatest opportunity to educate both the candidates themselves and voters about the policy changes we want to create things, and this is WIN's agenda: affordable housing, Black equity through home ownership, stronger environmental policies, legal support for immigrants, and real investments in public safety that decenter policing. WIN is holding an online action with candidates on Sunday, March 20th. That's next Sunday at 3 p.m. All Souls has committed to turning out at least 50 people for that action, but we're hoping to get 75. We have 43 people registered now, and I encourage you to join us. There is no easier way to show your support for real policy change and to learn about what WIN and All Souls are doing. Let me close with a final observation and hope for where we are now in our nation and our faith community. As we continue to negotiate the threats and impacts of COVID, we're going to be resuming more and more in-person activities. But we have to admit that it's not going to feel exactly the same or be exactly the same as before. We live in a changed world, and our congregation, all congregations, frankly, have to change as well. And long before the pandemic, many congregations were already recognizing that to stay relevant in today's world and to become more multicultural, we needed to abandon one-size-fits-all ways of doing church and instead create more accessible and flexible ways of doing things and being together. The pandemic has made this exponentially more true. And so it's a great time to reconsider the approaches we're taking to our social justice work. And if alongside the importance and power of having impact as a congregation, we recognize the importance and power of preparing and inspiring and supporting people to be agents of change in their own lives, then we might very well have an impact that is effective, rewarding, and sustainable. We can and should be proud of the incredible justice work that this congregation and its congregants have done in the last 200 years. And this pride needs to go hand in hand with humility and honesty about our shortcomings as well. And these are not mutually exclusive. We can feel a sense of appreciation and a sense of responsibility at the same time. Together, I think that's a great combination to help propel the work forward. So let's see what we can do together in our next 200 years. Amen.
In my work as a residential property manager here in Washington, D.C., I've had tenants from all over the world, all continents and subcontinents. 2 weeks ago, Friday, I checked in with one of my tenants who's from Ukraine. Her dad had refused to evacuate, so the rest of the family had stayed there with him. Yesterday, I learned that her family did finally evacuate on Wednesday, just 48 hours before bombs started raining down on their city. It's hard to stomach the news from Eastern Europe, the devastation of Ukraine, the refugee crisis, and what appear to be war crimes happening in plain view. The current crisis is one more iteration of recent mass migrations out of war zones, including families with young children desperate for the basic security of food and shelter. The images of crowded train platforms evoke the horrors of World War II, when desperate families left homes to flee coming onslaught. I'm quoting the UUA's recent statement when I say that we are also mindful that the authoritarian, imperialistic ideology seeking to deny Ukrainians their rights to live free and independently under the false anti-Semitic guise of denazification is directly tied to colonialist ideologies globally and here in the US that endanger the health, well-being, and lives of BIPOC individuals, members of the LGBTQIA+ community, and other marginalized populations. There is so much that we can do. We at the UUA, still quoting, encourage Unitarian Universalists to contribute to relief efforts through the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, UUSC. UUSC will be working with the Hungarian Unitarian Church and other partners in Eastern Europe to provide aid to those displaced by sudden war. UUSC has a long history of refugee support work, stretching back to their earliest days when they helped Jewish refugees escape Nazi persecution. Through our attention and generosity, we can save lives and relieve suffering. May our generosity assure those in harm's way that they are not alone in their trials. May the ministry of our congregations and the lived faith of individual Unitarian Universalists contribute to a more just and peaceful world. You can text ASCU to 73256, or you can scan the QR code to give. Thank you.
Folks that are here are invited to join a social hour in Pierce Hall afterward. Folks online are invited to join social hour online. May we honor the courageous commitment of our ancestors by taking up the work that is ours to do now. And regardless of where we choose to live out the calling of our faith, may we dedicate ourselves to doing so grounded in spirit, motivated by love, and with a fierce passion for the liberation of all people. Amen.